You may have seen the headlines recently that the BLS had a massive revision downward to the
hmm
jobs number to the tune of 911,000 fewer jobs were created.
So it's important to remember that the early numbers we see are an estimate. Again, this is a survey, so you are collecting data from employers, and sometimes it takes employers a while to get data back to the BLS.
We always try to make even the most nerdy information entertaining and interesting. Hello, hello, welcome back.
Hello, good to see you again.
Great to see you too. Although we got to see each other in person this week, which is
I
always super
know.
exciting. Off the screen and IRL.
Yeah, IRL.
IRL. Welcome back, everybody, to Living Richly with Curo. This is episode 71. My name is Anne McCabe. I am the CEO and a partner here at Curo Private Wealth, and I'm joined, as always, by my lovely partner, Atricia.
Hello, I am Atricia Roberts, COO and partner here at Curo. Thanks for checking us out or coming back again.
Yes, we love and appreciate you all. If this is your first time, we are here to educate, inspire, empower you on your financial journeys. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a warning that today may be a slightly nerdier topic than we normally talk about, but you may have seen the headlines recently that the BLS had a massive revision downward to the
hmm
jobs number to the tune of 911,000 fewer jobs were created leading up
hmm
to the end of March of this year than were previously thought. And so we wanted to talk about how the BLS works, how they come up with the unemployment numbers and the job numbers in the first place, how they're measured, why there are revisions normal, and most importantly, what it means for our understanding of the economic picture today. So bear with us, but hopefully this will be some good fodder for your next cocktail party. You can impress your friends with
Oh,
how much you know about the BLS.
this will be wonderful information for a well, actually moment, which I personally happen to love.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, actually you don't know what you're talking about. This is actually how it works. So, yeah, so stick with us. Hopefully, we always try to make even the most nerdy information entertaining and interesting.
Yeah,
All right. So, why don't you kick us off, Teresa, with
sure.
the surveys?
All righty. So we'll talk about the two surveys. So the BLS, as Anne has already referenced, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics is what BLS stands for, produces two different reports each month. So the first report is the household survey. And in this report, 60,000 households are surveyed. And this is how we start to calculate an unemployment rate number. And then there is an establishment survey, and about 119,000 businesses and government agencies covering about 600,000 work sites get surveyed. And this is where our jobs number comes from. So the key difference is that the household survey measures people who are employed, unemployed, or not in the workforce. And while the establishment survey measures jobs, so the actual number of jobs. So even if there is one person, if they are working two jobs, then it is counted twice for the two jobs.
So now we're going to talk about how the unemployment rate, which you hear about all the time, how that is actually calculated. It is a formula. So the formula is the unemployment rate equals the unemployed people divided by the labor force. The labor force is people working and people actively looking for work. So a key distinction here is if you were looking for work and then you stopped looking for work, whether that's because you're discouraged or you just decided not to look for work anymore, you are not considered in the labor force, even though you are technically not working. So, to give you an example, let's say there are 160 million people in the labor force and 6.4 million are unemployed. We take the 6.4, we divide it by 160, and we get an unemployment rate of 4%. As I mentioned a moment ago, there are some limitations to this formula. One is that it does not consider discouraged workers. And there are some discouraged workers that have been looking for a job for months or potentially even years, and they throw in the towel, right? And so they technically would love to have a job, but they are not actively looking for work anymore. And so they are not considered in the labor force. It also doesn't reflect anything about the quality of the jobs and when people are underemployed. So the term underemployed is used if you end up taking a job that is less than what you would typically be qualified for or skilled for. You are considered underemployed. And there's no real way to distinguish those people who are
Hmm.
underemployed in the unemployment number.
Yeah, and I also think that that's why many Americans sometimes feel like unemployment is worse than the numbers actually suggest, just because it
Mhm.
doesn't include that segment of people who may technically have a job but not earning a living wage. So,
Yeah, the other thing that you can do when you're looking at the data is you can break out college educated workers
hmm.
from, high school educated workers. You can break out different minority groups. And we have seen over time, or even like, male, female, we've seen over time that different populations of the labor force also are impacted differently by the unemployment rate. So maybe if you're a highly educated or highly technical skilled labor participant, you are going to have a lower employment rate than unemployment rate rather than someone who has a high school degree and doesn't have that sort of skill. So there are so many nuances in
Right.
the unemployment rate, and it's hard to paint the entire labor force with a broad brush, which is what this number tends to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we'll talk a little bit about how the jobs number is calculated. So the establishment survey collects payroll data. And remember, that surveys businesses and government agencies. And employers will report on how many people are on their payroll, hours worked, and their wages. The monthly jobs number equals the change in total non-farm payrolls from the previous month. So when we get that jobs report, this number of jobs were added. It's the change from the previous month of that establishment survey payroll data. This is the headline number. So this is what you'll see on the news, read in the Wall Street Journal. I.e., the US added 99,000 jobs last month. So it's important to remember that the early numbers we see are an estimate. Again, this is a survey. So you are collecting data from employers, and sometimes it takes employers a while to get data back to the BLS. So many of the numbers we get as early estimates are subject to revision as more and more employers start to send in and share their payroll data.
Right. So that's a good way into why revisions happen and why they
Mhm.
are quite common and quite normal, at least with the way the BLS works today. So there are two types of revisions that we see. The first is monthly revision. So as Atricia was mentioning, as more late survey responses come in, the BLS is able to kind of true up those numbers and get a more accurate view than the initial estimate may have shown. The second revision is the annual benchmark revision, and this is the big one. So every March, the BLS resets the jobs data using the most recent and accurate data from unemployment insurance tax records. So this covers nearly all employers. And the report that we just recently got here in September, this was the preliminary benchmark revision that is anticipated for a final revision in March of next year. But what this initial revision showed was a downward revision to jobs of the 911 100,000 jobs that we mentioned that led up to March of this year. And that was higher than economists expected. Economists expected 700,000 downward revision. And of course, we got that 911. So this doesn't mean that all of a sudden 911,000 jobs suddenly disappeared. It just means that the original estimates that we have all been working off of had overstated the job creation by quite a bit.
Yeah, and that of course leads us right into what exactly does this mean for all of us? And to Ann's point, overstatement suggests that the labor market wasn't as strong as the BLS initially thought, and that the hiring slowdown has actually been underway for a lot longer than maybe we realized at the beginning of the year. The US did add jobs, just fewer than originally estimated and thought, of course, originally estimated for higher, and of course, that number revised down. Revisions remind us that the first numbers are simply an estimate, they're not gospel. And again, we won't say take them with a grain of salt, but we do have to remember that they're subject to the revision. And policymakers, economists, all rely on these numbers, but they always know that the revisions are coming. So I think the headline here is just that the job market has been slowing down for maybe a little longer than we originally thought now, which may be a little bit of an indicator of where we are in the economic cycle. But to double click on Ann's point, it doesn't mean that 900,000 jobs just suddenly went away.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I do think that this is bringing up some interesting points
Mm-hmm.
about possibly is it time to rethink how the BLS works? Because my understanding of the surveys, at least after the initial interview, is that these are done via home phone. Do you have a home phone anymore?
I do not.
Me neither. Have you ever gotten a call from the BLS asking if you're
I have not.
unemployed? Me neither. Nor do I know one single soul who has ever gotten a call from the BLS to ask them if they are looking for work or how that is going. So, recently the head of the BLS was fired by President Trump because he didn't like the data that came out, and obviously the person at the head was not responsible for the data. But I do think that I'm hoping that this will bring up the broader conversation of, okay, it's 2025. Is this still the best way to collect
Right.
this data? Like, surely with all of the technological advances that we've made, surely there is a better way. So we'll see if anything comes about in terms of changing the process for how they get this data. But for now, this is how it works.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier point, it's why it's very difficult to assess the accuracy of these kind of numbers when you're trying to sort of get a broad idea of what's happening across the country in different demographics, different age groups, different education levels. It's very hard to do. And in the scope of the US population, 60,000 households is not a whole lot.
No,
And again,
no.
to your point, neither one of us have ever been surveyed in that household survey. But I mean, I have the same thoughts around the census every 10
Yeah,
years. I'm like,
for
the
sure.
census comes around every decade. You think every 10 years it would be leaps and bounds better. And then there's just still someone knocking at my door with a laptop
Yeah, exactly. Like,
every
great, you
10
have a
years.
laptop now and not a piece of paper with the pencil and the bubbles
Right,
to
right.
fill
But you're
in.
still
But
knocking on my door. And if you're anything like me, which you're probably not, I will ignore you because why are you here?
yeah, no, we do not open the door in our
We do not
household
open
for
the door.
strangers.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
because you're either trying to sell us something or you're trying to, give us brochures on some politician. So no,
right.
no, thank you.
Yeah, but there's several of these sort of general population survey styles that I think could stand. They have some room for improvement if we want to get more accurate data about what's really happening especially in the labor force.
Right.
Because again, every month we are subject to whatever the revision is.
Yeah, exactly. All right, y'all, that is your economics lesson for this week. Hopefully that was
I said
interesting.
that wasn't
And
bad,
I
right?
know, I don't think so. I think we made it entertaining, hopefully.
Nice and
So,
digestible,
yeah, exactly. So now it's time for our closing thought. I'm going to go first this week.
please.
And my closing thought, I'm sure you've heard this quote before, but I re came across it recently, and it is a quote from Billie Jean King that pressure is a privilege. And we've talked about this concept on the podcast before, but when we are experiencing pressure, it is an opportunity. It is because of some sort of opportunity, right? We are being pushed outside of our comfort zone, and it's an invitation, I think, to get outside of our comfort zone, to push our boundaries, and to try to achieve the excellence that we are going after. So I think it's a mindset shift that when we are experiencing pressure, instead of letting it stress us out or debilitate us, hopefully we can turn around that energy and let
Hmm.
it ignite a fire in us and let us be grateful for the pressure that we experience because not everybody gets to experience pressure like we do.
That's a very interesting take.
I know. I knew you would love it.
But no, I understand that, and I think it is true, right? I think it is true. It is a privileged space to be able to push yourself, and challenge yourself in new ways and see just how far you can stretch. So I'll go with that, Billie Jean King.
All right. She may know a thing or two.
She may know
She
something. I
may
don't know.
know something about pressure.
Yeah. Well, I struggled with a closing thought today, but I was sharing with Anne before we started recording that I've sort of fallen down this rabbit's hole of reading about and learning more about the year 1968 in the US. And really, what triggered it is the sort of idea of unprecedented times, right? Like we're living in unprecedented times. These are things that are so outside, these are crazy times, crazy things are happening. And again, neither Anne and I were born in 1968, but I'm sure for those who were, they will probably argue that the 60s may have been a little crazier than what we're experiencing now. I mean, all of the events that happened in just the year 1968, right? You're talking about height of the Vietnam War, draft, presidential election year, the assassinations of both Dr. King and Robert F. Kennedy, all of these things happening within a matter of months, right? Riots, violent protests on the street, violence at the Democratic and Republican national conventions. It was wild. It was a
Mm,
wild year. But in thinking of that, I think the important thing to realize is that we are resilient when we make up our minds to be. So even when things feel like unprecedented times, crazy times, we have come through very challenging periods in our history before, and in many cases, we have emerged better for
mm,
it. So I think the idea is to remember that if we commit ourselves to moving forward positively, we are resilient as people, as Americans, and we can emerge from challenging, crazy, unprecedented times
hmm.
better than the way we started them.
Gosh, I love that. What an amazing message. And it's why I love going back and studying about
Yeah,
history because, when news outlets say things like this is unprecedented, we've never experienced this before, like they want people to click on that article, right?
right,
They want
right.
to incite fear in people because that's what gets eyeballs on them and
Hmm.
that's how they sell advertising is the reality. So I think it's, important for us to do our own homework and for us to come to those conclusions, right? Like, is this really are these really unprecedented times? And to
Right.
your point, have there ever been crazier or more challenging times in our history? And
Right.
yeah, the confidence that that gives us that we did, make it through. And sometimes those crazy times are what we need to make positive change, right?
Hmm.
Because if everything is kind of fine and comfortable and status quo, then it tends to just stay status quo, right?
Yeah.
So beautiful reminder. Thank you for going down that rabbit
Yeah, of
hole
course.
and reminding us.
Yeah. Maybe this is just a little bit of the privilege of pressure, right? Maybe we just,
Mm,
as a country, are experiencing a little pressure, and hopefully it lends itself to us becoming better
yeah,
than we have been.
yes, exactly. Well, thank you for sharing. That was fantastic. See,
Of
you
course.
always come up with brilliant Closing
I
thoughts,
struggle
when you're
every week.
like, all right,
I'm
everyone.
like, what can I give the listeners?
Yeah, well, it's always brilliant. So even if you do struggle, you always pull through.
Thanks, partner.
Anytime. Anytime. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. We will see you back here next week. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Tag us on Instagram. Send us an email at podcast@curoprivatewealth.com. We love to hear from you. Write us a
Mhm.
review. That would be much appreciated. And until next time.
Live richly.
Thanks again for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Friendly reminder that this is for informational purposes only. For additional information, please visit us at www.curoprivatewealth.com. Until next time, live richly.